And here we are back yet again with another video for my 2026 NFL Deep Dive Series. Now it's the number 28 team, the Las Vegas Raiders, coming off of being the number 1 overall pick, getting Fernando Mendoza, new head coach Klint Kubiak after that disaster that was Pete Carroll, that even I didn't think would be that big of a disaster. The Raiders were ranked much higher in my power rankings last year, now 28th, probably closer to what they actually are. They somehow retained Maxx Crosby after the disaster Baltimore Ravens trade that never was. That was, but then wasn't. They did some interesting things in the draft. I think getting Jermod McCoy in the 4th round was really good, but some questionable decisions that we'll get to from a roster building perspective here in this first year that left some position groups really starved for certain amounts of talent that I think they desperately needed to really raise the ship here. I thought signing Tyler Linderbaum was really good. That's going to help Fernando Mendoza in the offensive line in general. Didn't do enough in the wide receiver room, though. We'll get to that, only bringing in Jalen Nailor. It really rides on what Klint Kubiak is trying to build there and how quickly he can build it. Having the coaching staff that he has that we'll get to, not a lot of experience here. It's Klint Kubiak coming in as my 20th ranked head coach. I believe he is my highest ranked first-time head coach. I thought that he was, last year I had Ben Johnson. He came in right smack dab in the middle for me as a head coaching hire because I thought he was just so incredibly innovative. I feel like Klint Kubiak is a good offensive coach. I think that he definitely earned this by what he did in Seattle, particularly this year getting to the Super Bowl and winning it and having an offense that was actually incredibly viable with Sam Darnold and an effective running game and the emergence of Jackson Smith and Jigba. But I just wonder what it looks like for him to come to a team as the team's overall leader with a rookie quarterback, though the number 1 overall pick, but not the prototypical number 1 overall pick quarterback that you'd really like to see. Like, it wasn't like a Joe Burrow or even like a Trevor Lawrence or anything like that. This was like closer to what we got with Jared Goff. He doesn't really have like a top level wide receiver, so there's a lot of roster development and player development that is resting on his shoulders by coming over here and taking this job in particular. And that's why I particularly really like the hiring of Andrew Janico to be the offensive coordinator. He was part of Kubiak's staff in Seattle previously. And I really like when brand new head coaches do this. When they come over as coordinators, they bring over somebody to run the actual offense who's used to the pregame strategies, the play calling, the in-game adjustments that they saw when this person was the coordinator, whether on the offensive side of the ball or their defensive side of the ball. So I think there's going to be a nice little through line here of Janico being the offensive coordinator. It's that Shanahan-style system, the outside zone running. I think we're going to see a lot of 12 personnel with 2 tight ends. They got the roster for that. They got Michael Mayer. They have Brock Bowers. They didn't trade Michael Mayer like many people were projecting they might. So I think we're going to see a lot of that with a lot of mesh and shallow cross coming into play here. Getting the ball into the hands of some of these bigger bodies. Bringing in Jalen Nailor to be like a bigger slot. Mixing him up with Trey Tucker, who's like a smaller outside receiver. They didn't really do a whole lot for the receiving game in the draft at all, with Malik Benson being the only draft pick that they made for the wide receiver room, Jalen Nailor being the only significant signing for the wide receiver room. So they're really, I think, banking on Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, and Ashton Genty being significant components of this offense. I think mix in a little Mike Washington Jr., the running back from Arkansas that they drafted as well. And it really works into that like shallow cross, mesh style offense, and then into the outside zone running where, Bowers and Mayer are great receiving tight ends. Probably the best 1-2 punch at tight end in the league right now that Andrews and Likely have been split up in Baltimore. So there's going to be a heavy use of those guys, and they're going to want them on the field in a lot of situations. And Bowers is such a great athlete. He can kick him outside and get some outside wide receiver reps maybe in some bigger sets here if they want to get Naylor on the outside. And Bowers can slide into that slot as well, and you can have Michael Mayer on the field at the same time as well. So you get a bigger body, you get more blocking, and more chances to break off big runs for Ashton Jeanty, who was kind of hindered, I would say, behind an offensive line last year that wasn't very well coached at all. And now that's going to completely be changed now with the addition of Tyler Linderbaum to this offense, a very key component to this offensive line's growth and their commitment, I really truly believe, to that 12 personnel, to that Ashton Jeanty being a huge feature of the offense, to that, wanting to have some tempo, but also being able to motion guys like Michael Mayer, like Jalen Naylor, like Brock Bowers, to create significant mismatch issues for the opposing defense. I expect there are a lot of window dressing to account for really just the lack of high-end talent outside of Bowers, and some would argue Ashton Jeanty, even after a poor year last year, can blame that just behind offensive incompetence. So I'm not really overly concerned about what this offense is going to be. I think we kind of know what they're going to be, and they're going to have to work around some of the growing pains of some of the younger guys on their roster and the rookie quarterback. My main concern is what's going on with this defense. Now, the Maxx Crosby pick, of course, falling apart really helped this group. But Rob Leonard's got his work cut out for him. He was the linebackers coach, and that linebacking room, I'm sorry, I don't think of anything overly great other than Maxx Crosby being a part of that defense last year at all. So this in-house hiring by Kubiak, it feels incredibly temporary. They're gonna be a 3-4 defense, and it's just gonna be the basics, really. You're gonna hope for some early down discipline, get some down and distance advantages against the opposing offense, and then send the pressure on the third down. You got Quay Walker now out there, you got Nakobe Dean, so you got some more athletes at the linebacker position to have some more situational blitz packages. But I feel like this was the biggest downgrade because they had Patrick Graham and all that. This just feels like a significant downgrade from what they had previously into a world where this is going to be the real detriment of the team. I don't think they were in a position to hire someone like a Rob Leonard to be the man to run the defense. I feel like they need the defense to be something more than what it's definitely projecting to be at this point. I'm not saying they didn't add some good bodies. Jermod McCoy was a huge steal in the draft, so if he's healthy, he'll get rolled out there, and him and Eric Stokes on the outside can, a zone man balance will be really nice for this defense. Being able to do both things on the outside will be incredibly advantageous for them when it comes to disguising coverages, disguising blitzes, disguising packages and whatnot. Is that going to be part of what Rob Leonard does? I think that first 3 weeks of the season, watching what the Raiders do on defense is really, I think, going to encapsulate what Rob Leonard's going to be as a defensive coordinator. And there's a real possibility that it's going to be incredibly uninventive and very straightforward and basic. And I think that will backfire on them because they don't really have this overall talent pool to not do window dressing, disguise, to sort of help out, force offenses to make mistakes to account for some of the talent deficiencies they have on the defensive side of the ball. So overall, it is a tier 3 offensive coaching staff, but a tier 6 bottom tier defensive coaching staff. There were so many other possibilities out there. I know that Jim Schwartz was holding out for that Cleveland job, but I don't know how you don't throw a huge offer at Jim Schwartz once you realize that Todd Monken was going to be the head coach of that Cleveland Browns team. I'd have to go back and check the timeline on when Rob Leonard was hired compared to Todd Monken getting hired in Cleveland. But I do feel like Rob Leonard was hired after, so I guess we'll chalk it up to why didn't they get Jim Schwartz? Maybe Jim Schwartz is an option next year. If Rob Leonard falls apart, I think it would be a good fit for this team based on, having Maxx Crosby and what Jim Schwartz did with Myles Garrett. So just having this unknown, having a completely unknown, inexperienced coaching staff at all 3 levels does create a deep deep bottoming out possibility because the experience levels just aren't there. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, guys, because as we keep releasing these videos, I don't want you to miss where I ranked your team, your favorite team. So hit the subscribe button so you guys don't miss anything that comes with this series on this channel. And now we're going to roll into the individual player grades and the player position group grades, starting with the quarterbacks. So the quarterback room here ranges from 25th to 26th at the start of the season, with the number 1 overall pick, Fernando Mendoza, and Kirk Cousins really leading the charge here. Now, the idea apparently so far is that Kirk Cousins is going to be the starter early in the season, and then they eventually will work in Fernando Mendoza into getting some reps. Now, that to me says it'll be about a 60-40, 50-50 season perhaps for each quarterback, as they, depending on how quickly Mendoza gets things together or how quickly Kirk Cousins potentially falls apart. But as an overall grade, they kind of fall into the same area as me. There's not a significant difference for me coming in, at least early in the season here, unless Mendoza turns out to be an absolute juggernaut or Kirk Cousins gets back to that, prime Minnesota form. But just looking at Mendoza, he's the one that we're going to feature here because he is the number 1 overall pick, and he did have some really great moments in college. Now, the first game that I watched of Mendoza last year, the first full game that I watched of Indiana, was against Penn State. And that was a Penn State team that had some injuries at quarterback with Drew Aller out, and Indiana was not looking good throughout most of that game. They really struggled moving the ball early, and they got behind the 8 ball real quick, and they just couldn't get momentum going. They couldn't get the ball down the field. They couldn't make catches. They couldn't make blocks. Everything was falling apart. And that's usually in a period of time where you find out what these players have basically deep inside them and in the mental aspect of their game. And Fernando Mendoza completely late in that game decided, I'm going to forget the first 3.5 quarters of this game. We're going to go win. And he just played out of his mind. And I've talked about that throughout a lot of my mock drafts when I said Fernando Mendoza just locked himself in as the number 1 overall pick because of this Penn State game. Because teams are going to look at that and they're going to be like, that's the kind of short memory, tenacity, resiliency that they're going to really, really like out of their quarterback to build a franchise around. So, and in college, he didn't have a whole lot of time to throw. He was 77th amongst college quarterbacks with time to throw, 19th in pressure faults. So there wasn't a whole lot of him just holding onto the ball and this all being on him. There wasn't a whole lot of a good play action game at Indiana either. But man, when he was under pressure, he was the 3rd best college quarterback graded in the league when facing pressure, 13th against the blitz, 4th when facing 4 or less pass rushers, 14th when kept clean. His deep ball, he was 11th. Intermediate, he was 14th. Short, he was 7th. He was all right perfectly in that range. Big time throws, he was 16th. Turnover worthy plays 13th. And the adjusted completion percentage was 6th. So there's some really, really good aspects to Mendoza's game that's showing that he has a good decision-making process and that he is cool, calm, and collected under pressure. And those are really the 2 biggest hurdles that you want to get over for your young quarterbacks. You want to get them, used to playing under pressure, feeling the speed against them, and having the 77th amount of time to throw. Translating that to the NFL, now you're not in a situation where you get a lot of these great college quarterbacks go to these great college programs who they get the ball, they drop back, and they got all day to throw the ball because they're at an elite program with an elite offensive line and an elite offensive play caller, and it's like playing high school ball out there. It's like pitch and catch type stuff. Mendoza didn't have that at Indiana. He was under pressure. He didn't have that time to throw, that time to sit back there and get to his 4th read on the field and then jog around a little bit and like you see so often at some of these bigger programs. So that, with that adjusted completion percentage, and how we see him under pressure, you combine those three aspects, now I feel like there's a much smoother transition to the pro level than people have really thought of. Because usually what you're thinking about is like he's going to have less time, but now he's actually going to have a pretty decent offensive line in front of him, better than what he had in Indiana. So I would say worst case scenario, the time from snap to ball out is going to be pretty similar to what he had at the University of Indiana. I can't anticipate it being all that different. And it's an exciting time because one of the pro comps he was getting coming out was like Jared Goff, where you feel like if you get him a good team, he can be a really successful quarterback. He's not going to go out there and lose you games. You just wonder if he has the ability to go out and win you the game, put the game on his back, the way that you'd see from a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen or Matthew Stafford, one of these upper echelon quarterbacks. Which also kind of, in turn, gives him a pro comp of Kirk Cousins. Because I think Kirk Cousins' time, like prime Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, had a lot of those features to him where it was like, man, it's like he's good enough to be your starter. He's good enough where it's going to be hard to figure out if you could upgrade from him. But if you don't give him a great roster, then you don't really know if he's going to be able to pull anything off for you and win a true championship. And those Minnesota teams never really had those great rosters. You know, like, yeah, he had Diggs and he had Justin Jefferson there. You know, you had the Jordan Addison bit there with a decent running game. But the defenses were kind of up and down. Brian Flores really turned that around for people in recent memory. And there was just, the play call, Kevin O'Connell and him, sort of meshing together. So there just wasn't like that high ceiling. And I think that Fernando Mendoza right now, if you were to ask me, how good is he going to be as a quarterback when he hits his peak? I would say, somewhere between prime Kirk Cousins and prime Jared Goff would be the range that he would find himself in. And is that a Super Bowl winning quarterback? Historically, up to this point, the answer is no, it isn't. However, can Klint Kubiak, if Klint Kubiak can outcoach the likes of Kevin O'Connell, Dan Campbell, etc., maybe he can get over that hump, get to that Super Bowl eventually once you build a much stronger roster over the next couple of years. It's a real mystery in a quarterback class that was not strong this year. It was not a strong quarterback class at all coming out. And I think that it definitely allowed Mendoza to be locked in as the number one overall pick, for sure. But it does feel, based upon how other teams drafted in the quarterback position this year as well, that it was a lot of teams feeling like next year was the year instead. So a lot to prove for Mendoza. I think he's got the fundamentals to pull it off. And I think that the Raiders will at least have the ability to run an efficient offense. It's just a mystery as to what the weapons and all that are going to be able to pull off with who they decided to go with in this first year for Mendoza and Klint Kubiak. Because their weapons group is coming in as 22nd to 27th for me. It's a group that you go, Brock Bowers is the number one receiver on the team at the tight end position. It's eerily similar to some of those lesser Kansas City Chief rooms where they had Travis Kelce and they just kind of had bodies at wide receiver that they would just rotate in and out. It feels like we're going to have a heavy rotation of wide receivers on this team and just riding the hot hands. But from a talent perspective, Trey Tucker, he's going to be your number one receiver, you would think. In terms of like an outside receiver, do-it-all receiver, 81% of his snaps were taken from the outside last year. He had 57 catches on 90 targets, 5 touchdowns. But he didn't shine like a number 1 receiver. He shined like a wide receiver 3. In all reality, 66th in drops percentage, 77th in contested catch percentage, 50th in deep balls, 65th in intermediate levels, 38th in the short. He was great as a little gadget receiver, 14th from behind the line of scrimmage, those screens and whatnot, screens and gadget plays. But overall, he was 60th amongst wide receivers versus man coverage, 61st versus zone. And for a guy his size, didn't get a lot of slot work. I wonder how much that's going to change, even though they brought in Jalen Nailor to be a bigger slot. It'll be interesting to see just how he is deployed in this offense, because do you deploy him the way that JSN was, or the way somebody else in that receiving room was? Like Cooper Kupp, or who even was wide receiver 3 in Seattle last year? Like, it doesn't even ring off the top of my head who that was. So it feels like an open competition here that I do feel like he would have the inside track on. But then they signed Jalen Nailor as like their big offseason weapon signing. After Nailor did 49 targets, 29 catches. Like he was a fine big slot receiver. 60% of his snaps were in the slot. I feel like it'll be closer to 50-50 this year, just with how they're going to be mixing and matching things up, I believe. But he had some really good aspects to his game. I mean, he was 5th in contested catch percentage amongst all eligible wide receivers. So that's going to be something I feel like they're going to use him for, because Trey Tucker isn't that type of guy on the outside. So maybe Jalen Nailor gets more outside snaps. He sort of becomes that contested catch guy deep down the field, because he was 7th in the league in terms of the deep ball grades. 37th in the intermediate. Didn't do anything in the short and behind the line of scrimmage area. So that's not something that was a part of his game last year when he did get on the field. But a lot of it was just projecting for what he could do if he got more opportunities. So this is a signing of, like, he got let go because Ty Felton went to Minnesota and they play the same role. So now he's here with the Raiders. And maybe the assumption is that he takes on the role of JSN. Like, one of these guys is going to be the JSN of this offense. Between him and I believe Trey Tucker will probably be the 2 options. It's just so underwhelming to have your top 2 wide receivers be a best case scenario wide receiver 3 on most other teams. Or at least on a good offense, you're looking at them as being wide receiver 3s. Jack Besh and Derek Young are going to be options here. Jack Besh, had some hype from TCU, I believe. Didn't really do a whole lot of anything last year. Derek Young's basically just coming over from Seattle. Offensive familiarity. You got Dante Thornton, who last year at the beginning of the year sort of earned his way into the starting lineup, but based on what you've seen here, the group they had last year was worse. Had even less. So it's not really saying much. They drafted Malik Benson, who I mentioned earlier. It's like you needed to do better than I think Malik Benson for this wide receiver room. You had to do it earlier. But the star of the offense is going to be, Ashton Genty and Mike Washington out of the backfield, doing things with them like we saw with Walker and Charbonnet last year with Seattle. And then the incorporation of the tight ends. And you have a top 2 tight end in the league when he's healthy in Brock Bowers, who took almost 50% of his snaps from the slot. He took another third of his snaps from a traditional tight end spot. 4th best tight end in the slot. 5th against man coverage. Great athlete, able to separate really well. He was still 14th versus zone, so he's still capable of finding the zones. He's a little bit relies a little too much on his athleticism sometimes in that period of time. You don't want him to run into coverage when they're in zone. But working those intermediate areas, man, third best tight end in the league in terms of grading from 11 to 19 yards down the field. That's a great wheelhouse to live in for a tight end. That's a great spot to live in for an offense, is having the ability to put the ball at that level and throw the ball down the field at that level, because you're getting first downs, you're getting yards in chunks. You just want a healthy season out of Bowers. He wasn't healthy last season, so you're gonna see he still had great numbers considering he was injured. 64 catches, 680 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Those numbers are gonna look even better by the end of the season if he can stay healthy. I expect him to be a huge feature in this offense, obviously. Immediately came into the league as a top 5, top 3 tight end, and just continued that trend despite the injury last year. And then his running mate, Michael Mayer, will be another great tight end opposite of him when they want to put Bowers in the slot or they want to run 2 tight ends on the field, 2 inline tight ends. A really solid wide receiver. A really solid receiving tight end, that we could probably see him be a starter on a bunch of other teams. And they quietly brought in Connor Hayward from Pittsburgh, who's sort of like a tight end fullback hybrid type player. Kind of like what Chris Cooley was back in the day for Washington, like an H-back type deal. So he'll be able to work a tight end spot. He'll be able to work into the backfield. He'll be a nice little gadget piece for Klint Kubiak to play with if they want to shift from 22 personnel into like a 31 personnel type of deal, or 13 personnel, like that type of thing, where you can have some of these bigger athletes on the field that are actually quite good and can do a number of different things. And you can mix and match where these guys are lining up to just create some advantages, create some leverage on some run plays. It's just, you're missing the high-end talent that a lot of these other wide receiver rooms, these other weapons rooms, seem to have. Bowers makes up for a lot of it. But if Bowers goes down and Bowers is injured like he was last year, this quickly becomes one of, if not the worst weapons group in the entire league. It really happens that quickly for them, which is why I would have really liked the pick to be different than Malik Benson and earlier than Malik Benson. There was a lot of great wide receivers. Elijah Surratt, the Indiana wide receiver, would have had a ton of familiarity with Fernando Mendoza, immediately comes to mind as somebody who I feel like they probably should have picked up when they had the chance, and they just didn't. And it's a confusing decision, but it's clear that if this group doesn't work out, it should be a very, very high priority in the next draft and free agency cycle, because it's too reliant on one of these outside wide receivers having a breakout season for it to truly be a competitive weapons group. Now at the running back room, it's Ashton Genty's show. They did bring in Mike Washington Jr. from Arkansas to be a backup, and I do expect him to get some pretty decent backup reps. Klint Kubiak likes to use the 2 running backs, as we've seen in the past. Walker and Charbonnet both had great seasons between the 2 of them. So I expect Washington, I don't expect him to get as much work as Charbonnet did as a number 2, because I think Ashton Genty is just waiting to be a beast in the NFL. Like, he had 3.7 yards per carry last year, but let's just work this math out here. 975 total rushing yards, 815 were after contact. So out of his 266 carries, 56 carries. How much is that math? 168 zone, 88 gap. Of that, only 160 yards were gained before contact was made with him. So he was getting, at best, a yard past the line of scrimmage before somebody was making contact with him. Less than that. Like, that is absolutely insane. Less than a yard past the line of scrimmage before contact was being made with him by a defensive player. That is unacceptable. Now, I know what they did with the offensive line and the run blocking last year was just unbelievably bad. But that is like epic levels of just bad offensive coaching for a run game. To put a guy with this amount of talent in that scenario, because he has 5 runs last year of 15 plus yards. That's it. For the 6th overall pick. For like an all-timer running back who had like 2,500 rushing yards at Boise State in his last year there. Unbelievably crazy. Like, that 3.7 yards per carry is literally all him. So there is something to that. Now, does that affect his confidence as a professional player? We'll have to see how that plays out. You know, will he be less patient behind the line of scrimmage because he just wants to get forward? Because that's just what he had to get used to, is just having to get forward. Will it cause him to make mistakes? You know, to not hit the right hole, to be focused on so many other things and have ball security issues. There's a number of mental hurdles that a guy who was put in the situation that Jeanty was last year now has to deal with this upcoming season. And it's you got to be a professional. I understand that, but that is a huge nightmare. And I'm still ranking them as like the 13th to 14th best running back room in the league overall, and getting that into that situation, because Jeanty's such a great talent. So we'll see what rebuilding this offensive line to a degree is going to be able to pull off for them. But man, oh man, I don't think it can get worse for what Jeanty had last year. So maybe buy high in Ashton Jeanty stock if you're a fantasy football player out there this upcoming season, because if he was doing all that on his own, who knows what can happen when he gets some blocking out there. And he's going to get it from this offensive line that's coming in 13th to 14th in run blocking and 19th to 22nd in terms of pass blocking. So it's every bit a middle of the pack offensive line. And it starts with left tackle Colton Miller, who's one of the best in the business. One of the absolute best in the business. Number 1 in pressures, gave up 0 sacks, 2nd in quarterback hurries, 5th in quarterback hits. Now, it was 152 pass snaps, so there was a lack of being on the field. But when he was out there, he was doing exactly what you would want a franchise left tackle to be doing. You know, he wasn't taking penalties either. He was just solid, reliable, top-level left tackle talent pass blocking. Didn't do a whole lot, didn't get a lot of run blocking opportunities, and I think that plays a lot into why the offensive line had struggles in general last year. When you lose your best offensive lineman, you know, having to just kick guys out to left tackle and hoping that they can replace a top-level talent is not realistic. So you kind of want to hope that you got other guys that you've built around him, but his get off, his first step, his positioning, his late hands, his strength at the point of attack, you know, being able to work against the bull rush, being able to counter speed, you know, having an answer to all these different pass rush moves that the elite level guys throw at him. He's really quietly also one of the best left tackles in the league. I don't think he gets a lot of love for being as great as he is, but he is in fact great. Playing next to him would have been Dylan Parham, I guess, until he went to the Jets. And now he's got Spencer Burford coming over from the 49ers to play next to him. And Burford, to me, I mean, I get it. He played in San Francisco, so from a scheme perspective, he's the guy that you bring over. But you look at the guy I got on my bench there, Jordan Meredith. I think Jordan Meredith is starting caliber. I think he's better than Jackson Powers-Johnson. I think he's better than DJ Glaze. He's definitely better than Spencer Burford. He can come out there and be your third best offensive lineman in this group. And that would raise the ship to incredible levels. It would make them a top 10 run blocking team. It would make them a bordering on top 10 pass blocking team if they just played him. I don't understand what happened last year, because the year before that, when he played the guard position, he was absolutely incredible. An absolutely incredible performance. And then for some reason last year, they decided that an offensive line that really worked for the Raiders was going to get completely changed. Jackson Powers-Johnson was going to go to guard. Jordan Meredith was going to go to center. And they sucked. They absolutely stunk as an overall offensive line. I don't know why they did that. Why they changed their positions. Jackson Powers-Johnson's still going to play guard, but that's because they brought in one of the best centers in the entire league, Tyler Linderbaum, which at least makes that an excusable move. You bring in a guy like Linderbaum who's just, one of the best offensive linemen in general, but from the center position, just understands all the aspects of the game, understands how to make these calls, these pre-snap calls, these pre-snap adjustments. And that's going to be something that's really going to help Fernando Mendoza. I talked about this previously. When you get these high-level centers who are just going to be really good at making it easier pre-snap after the huddle for these young quarterbacks. One less thing these young quarterbacks got to concern themselves with pre-snap, and you can ease them into those situations. And it also allows them to learn a lot by having a top-level center to make those calls, to make those reads, and then be able to communicate them on the sidelines, be able to communicate them in the film room during practice, and being able to work at it during the games. So I think that's going to help the mental aspect of Fernando Mendoza significantly to have a guy like Linderbaum, who may not be the best pass protector, but for what this team is going to be likely looking to do, he's just a perfect fit for all things considered. A team that's going to want to run the ball with Ashton Genty, that's going to want to play big boy ball with two tight ends, and that's going to want a young quarterback to be able to develop and play with some confidence. That's something that Tyler Linderbaum is going to be able to bring to this team. And why it's excusable to have Jackson Powers-Johnson at right guard. I would like to see Jordan Meredith play left guard. He may still win out that job anyway. And then I think there's an underrated potential competition at right tackle, even though Charles Grant is listed as left tackle, backup left tackle. And that's between him and DJ Glaze. I wonder what switching Grant over to right tackle would look like if he's been working left tackle. How much of a hit does that take for his overall abilities? Not that DJ Glaze is bad. I think in this offensive line, it's actually a pretty good situation for them to find themselves in, especially if they upgrade Spencer Burford with Jordan Meredith. It's not the worst case scenario because he is the fourth best offensive lineman in the starting five. So it's not, and he's had some good moments. Maybe in this new offensive scheme, he'll be able to, take it up to the next level. And if you have a fully healthy offensive line, I don't see why that couldn't be the case, because I think he'll be playing with more confidence as he's playing with better players overall, with a better offensive scheme than what he had the year before. So I think there's a lot of potential there also. So this offensive line is not completely lost. It's not, completely bad for them to be like a middle of the pack offensive line. I think it's the perfect offensive line with the perfect bodies for what they're trying to build for this team. There's enough experience there, high-end talent, and then developing talent coming up from underneath. I think it's a well-built offensive line so far. Again, I just question the wisdom of having Jordan Meredith on the bench instead of Spencer Burford. That's all. I understand why Burford, because he's used to this offense. It's a much easier transition for the new offense. But I wonder how long that's going to last. I feel like it's only going to last as long as Jordan Meredith takes to catch up to the Kubiak/Shanahan style offense that's going to be deployed here. So overall, the offense is 23rd for me with a tier 3 offensive coaching. They're 28th in pass offense, and that comes from, everything, all things considered. And then 14th in run offense with the potential to be a top 10 rush offense if they can make some offensive line adjustments there. Now let's move on to the most questionable part of this football team, and that is the defensive side of the football, where really outside of Maxx Crosby, there's not a whole lot going on here in terms of something you get excited about. But with this defensive front, and this is a group I definitely do have concerns about. I got them as the 27th to 28th pass rush and the 22nd to 25th run defense. And that's a scary thought considering they have Maxx Crosby, who is an elite level player in both aspects. He is a complete all-purpose edge player who can, first of all, can rush the passer. He had 10 sacks last year, 16th in the league, 21st in pressures, 33rd in win percentage, 18th in quarterback hits, 27th in quarterback hurries, and that was considered a down year for him. That's a down year for him, but he's working against double teams. He was 128th in penalties. He was taking penalties like crazy. So he went from being like a top 5 pass rusher to now he's probably like somewhere at the end of the top 10, but whatever. Keeping him because of that trade that fell apart, just seeing how this all graded out, it worked out huge for this team. Because they would have been dead last in both of these categories had he not stayed. Maybe they would have been able to snag Ruben Bain at 15 before somebody else scooped him up. I don't know, but it wouldn't have been as good as what they have with Crosby here. Who, he was 4th in batted balls. He was 18th in stops percentage. 23rd in forced fumbles. He was doing it all for this team. And he's going to be expected to do it all again. Another year of 900 plus snaps. Another year of, having to work against double teams all year round, especially because there isn't like this true great talent around him in this group. It's sort of like the wide receiver room or the weapons room where you had Brock Bowers and then you just had a bunch of warm bodies after. Throwing guys out there and going like, all right, somebody be a breakout star for us. We're going to give an opportunity to 7 guys in the hopes that one of them becomes somebody. But when you have a guy like Crosby who does it all, has the right attitude, carries the Raider logo on his helmet with his personality, I can't believe they were trying to get rid of this guy. Because if anyone can carry this defensive line to success, it would be him. Right? Like, obviously, you can't expect him to do it all. Especially to perform high levels in a statistical standpoint if he's literally out there doing it by himself. And I think that's why they made the additions that they did. Getting Kieron Crawford in the draft. They made Malcolm Kuntz is back there. He'll be a situational pass rusher, rotating on the outside with free agency signing Kwity Paye, coming over from the Colts. Who, not a great pass rusher, but will be a great compliment on early downs for him. He's a number 1 quality in terms of his run defense. So how he ends up working out with Malcolm Kuntz as a rotation, how they rotate those guys out, and how he works as a pass rusher will affect what Crosby is able to produce on the opposite side. Because if Kwity Paye is able to, beat guys around the corner or win with some power, they're going to have to start worrying about him as well. So they won't always be able to just chip at Crosby and all that. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities that are going to open up for Kwity Paye. And in turn, that's going to open up opportunities for Crosby more often. So if Kwity Paye is just killing these teams, it'll open up more for this group. And it's really reliant on him achieving a number 1 caliber pass rush performance, like a starter. Because right now he doesn't really have that. Right now he's like, if he's on the field as your pass rusher, you don't feel terrible about it, but you don't feel great about it either. You're looking to upgrade that, and that's why you have Malcolm Kuntz. Because he never really reached that top 20 pick, first round pick position that the Colts gave him coming out of Michigan. you just wonder if he does have that in him at all. Maybe the change of scenery helps. Maybe playing with maybe not being expected to be the number one defensive end on your team and having a true elite level defensive end on the other side of you helps. Helps bring him up. Helps get him more situations. Helps him play with some more confidence. It's very possible that the change of scenery can be incredibly beneficial for a guy like Kwity Paye. It's what's going on the inside, though, that is extra concerning. Because they don't have a great interior defensive lineman really at all. They were hoping a couple of years ago it was going to be Christian Wilkins, and that never worked out. Never got on the field for him. So now you're sitting there with Jonah Laulu, who is, maybe if you're running a base 3-4 and you're running 3 interior defensive linemen, he gets on the field on some teams. Adam Butler is like a number 3 caliber guy. You got Thomas Booker and JJ Peegs out there who are sort of mirror opposites of one another. If you want a pass rushing guy, you're going to play Booker. If you want more of a run defender, you'll play Peegs. They drafted Brandon Cleveland, who's just, this is another position group like the wide receivers, like I was talking about. It's eerily similar as to what they did here in the offseason and in the draft. That was just underwhelming and not what I felt they should have been doing, and not as aggressive as they should have been. You sign Kwity Paye, that's basically like what they did when they signed Jalen Nailor. It's like, it's a good signing, but do you want to maybe get somebody else in there? And then they went and got Kieron Crawford, which you're like, ugh, okay. And they draft Brandon Cleveland, and you're like, okay, I guess. It's just, I would have loved to see an interior defensive lineman get picked early by them. There were so many. There were so many in that top, 75. Where it's like, man, you could have gotten somebody real good who could have been a great contributor to your team. And they just didn't swing on them. It's very confusing. It was a very confusing draft strategy, and this group suffers like the wide receiver room did because of that decision making. And the linebacking room comes across really the same also. There were so many good linebackers, guys. There were so many good ones. I don't get it. I don't get what they're doing here. And why they left this group hang. I know they signed two in free agency. I get it. They felt like they upgraded enough, but they're still the 27th to 28th in coverage, 27th to 28th in run defense. I barely want to talk about Quay Walker. Like, barely. I've never respected him since he threw that just pathetic tantrum when he got ejected from that game against the Lions. When he's literally walking down the tunnel crying and throwing his arm down and everything like a child. It's like, and there's been nothing about his game, nothing about his demeanor or anything that has showed he has matured from that moment as a person or as a player. I think that he is a linebacker 3 at best, a low-end linebacker 3. But he's going to come in here, and because he's a great athlete, because he's got some blitz potential here, he got signed and he's going to play. And he's going to start, and because Lindenberg and Eichenberg never really developed into what we were hoping, Seguna Lobi is kind of just more a special teams guy who had some flashes in the past. This is your 2 linebackers in this 3-4 defense. I like Nakobe Dean. I like Nakobe Dean coming out of Georgia. I thought it was a travesty that he fell the way he did, those injury concerns or whatever, and I think he's a solid starting caliber linebacker. Maybe better served as a number 2 linebacker, but getting an opportunity here with the Raiders. And he's going to be the one that really has to lead what's going on up in between the hashes here. Because, we'll get to the secondary soon. You got Crosby, you got Kuntz, and you got Kwity Paye there on the edges, but there's really nothing going on the interior defensive line. You got nothing else going on at the linebacker position. There's a lot on the shoulders here in Nakobe Dean, to continue to develop as a player. I think in pass coverage, I actually thought he was fine. Was targeted 26 times last year. Gave up 17 receptions. Completion percentage was third best amongst linebackers. Only 201 yards, 13th best passer rating when targeted. 15th in man coverage. He was 38th in zone coverage, though. And we've talked about this previously with other linebackers where the expectation that these linebackers are going to be out there in man coverage is just not high. It's not often. It's not a lot. Most of what linebackers do in pass coverage is they play in zone. So he's much closer to being the 38th best cover linebacker than he is the 15th best cover linebacker. Because of that. Does that mean that I'm concerned about him in coverage? Not really. I'm more concerned about the aspect that if they can't get pressure up the middle and they can't get penetration up the middle in the run game and all that he's going to be just hung out to dry all year. And maybe because of that, he'll end up with probably 130 tackles by the end of the season. You can chalk this up to a prediction. But I just have a lot of fears for what he's going to be put through this year because of what's going on in front of him and what's going on next to him. I think that there was ways that you could have helped Nakobe Dean if you were the Raiders to have a higher ceiling for what he could produce this upcoming season, because he's a good athlete. He's not a bad tackler. He's decent he's starting caliber in the run game, starting caliber in the pass game. It's just somebody that, you'd prefer him to be your number 2 linebacker probably. And we'll see what Rob Leonard, a former linebackers coach, can do with these guys. Like, this is the one thing where when you hire a coordinator, whatever position coach he was before, you expect at the very least that position group to be developing well and to playing well. There's like levels to this. You're the position coach, and then you get hired as a coordinator. That position better at least be good right out the gate. Same thing when you get hired as a head coach. Whatever side of the ball you were on, that better look good quick, because that's at least your wheelhouse. So this is the group to really watch. This is the make or break group, I feel, for this defense. If Rob Leonard can develop these linebackers, can get something out of Quay Walker somehow, or can develop one of these guys on the bench that he had worked with previously that did not perform well, Lindenberg and Eichenberg specifically, if he can all of a sudden get something out of them, which I feel like him being kept and them making these 2 free agency signings says that Lindenberg and Eichenberg are kind of just, they're Jags. They're special teams guys. I guess we'll play you for a couple plays in this series while the starters rest type guys. So maybe he saw Quay Walker and he's like, I can work with that. I can work with the athlete. Saw Nakobe Dean and he went, I can work with how good he is all around. Sort of an all-around linebacker. That'll be a good guy to have out there in all situations. But if this group plays at the level that I currently have them at, then this defense is just not going to be good. It's not going to be a good defense. And we get to the defensive backs, and they got them 19th to 23rd. It was they committed a lot of draft capital to this group this past offseason. This was a priority for them. Maybe too much, but it definitely was a priority for them. All the rookies they added. Jermod McCoy in the 4th round. He, to me, if he's healthy, is the best defensive back on this team. It's just a matter if he's healthy or not. And the fact that he didn't go until the first pick of the 4th round says that there's probably a lot of red flags around his health, around his knee or whatever, that it may be a disaster for him. It may be. But it was a hell of a swing to take. It was the right thing for them to do. I got high hopes for what they have with Jermon McCoy on the outside and how quickly it takes for him to get into that starting reps, how quickly that happens this summer, if it happens at all, because for everything that we heard at Tennessee, he was healthy enough to play at the end of the year for Tennessee. They just held him out so he wouldn't re-aggravate it. But then the geniuses of the NFL, with their great medical staff, they found apparently some deficiencies, or I think it was a degenerative ACL or something like that. Something funky was found in him that made him drop as far as he did. But if he gets to play, and he's playing outside Eric Stokes, and Eric Stokes, for all intents and purposes, very, very quietly, a pretty damn good corner in this league. You know, in Green Bay, he kind of fell behind Jair Alexander and all that, and didn't really get his love. But last year with the Raiders, I mean, he wasn't bad. He played 900 snaps, 896 outside, so he's not going to be a slot guy for you at all. Wasn't great in man coverage, but in zone coverage, fantastic work. Absolutely fantastic work. He was targeted 50 times, only gave up 28 catches. That was 29th in terms of completion percentage given up. Only 261 yards allowed, so that's less than 10 yards a catch allowed. Only gave up 1 touchdown. Didn't have any interceptions. Only had 4 pass breakups. Was 24th in passer rating allowed. Only took 2 penalties. And for a corner, only taking 2 penalties, that is unheard of. Because corners get penalties for nonsense. So it was a good year. And it was a good year with not a whole lot going on around him. So now that you've added a little bit more talent, you know, some guys have had, you know, are going on to another year of development here. If Jermon McCoy is healthy, you could have quietly one of the better 1-2 punches in the cornerback rooms in the league. So he's at least somebody to watch out for. Again, you kind of like it where it was him and McCoy on opposite sides being able to hold down one side each, and that would be the real ideal situation. Because right now you got Darian Porter, who's going to be playing the other outside corner as of right now, at least until McCoy is healthy enough to play. And he's a decent player. He's a good corner 3, I would say. And then you got Teron Johnson playing in the slot for you, who you traded from Buffalo, who's literally the exact opposite of what you have in Eric Stokes. Eric Stokes had almost no slot snaps, and Teron Johnson had 1 outside corner snap last year. 457 snaps in the slot. He was the 13th ranked slot corner in the league last year, graded. 51 targets, 34 receptions given up. It's a little bit more. Didn't really have a lot of forced incompletions. Only had 3 pass breakups. No interceptions. Gave up 2 touchdowns, 332 yards. About 10 yards a reception. Passer rating, he gave up a 78. So, you know, he had a rough time playing in man coverage in the slot, but when he got put in zone, 13th amongst corners. So, like, there was a lot of give and take here with Teron Johnson last season, and now him coming in, I think he's going to be just a solid slot guy for you to deploy. You know, got a little bit more size on him than some of these smaller slot players. I think he's going to be not that bad. I think it's a good spot to be in. Now, again, he's sort of, in terms of a talent level, a wash with what you have in Darian Porter. Darian Porter being the outside corner. So that's why another reason you'd probably like to see Jermon McCoy actually get to play and actually get to play healthy, because it'll raise up the level of this group significantly. And you got Traden Stukes, who you took in the 2nd round, who's a good run defender, sort of like a hybrid safety corner. I wonder if he can end up in this group. Is he going to end up being a corner, or is he going to be a safety? Depending on what you see from Isaiah Polamau at the other safety spot opposite Jeremy Chin. They got Hezekiah Masses, who's a decent rookie. They had DeCameron Richardson carry over from last year. So, you know, with 3 rookies introduced into the cornerback room alone, 2 minimum, 3 if you count Stukes. They're throwing a lot of draft assets out here. Now, should they have picked Stukes? I think they could have gotten him a little bit later, and they could have upgraded the defensive tackle or linebacker room in turn. But, if he's your guy, he's your guy. I think they liked him because of his versatility to play both corner and safety. And just the way that this room is shaped, I feel like playing safety is his best bet to get on the field, even though they have Dalton Johnson, another rookie out there, who I really liked. I thought was sneaky good. He's going to be competing for that safety spot as well. And I think both of them being good in the run game, it's going to create an interesting competition between those two guys. I think they're more in direct competition with each other than Stukes and Jermod McCoy are, right? I feel like that is more of what the rookie competition looks like. I feel like Jermod McCoy's more in competition with himself at this point to get healthy enough to play. And then you got Jeremy Chinn, who is your best safety, who does it all. He's that do-it-all safety. He's going to be your dime linebacker. He played straight up linebacker for Carolina one year, where he was like, he came down, played linebacker in the nickel. But, 282 snaps in the slot, 359 as a box safety, 184 as a traditional free safety. So he played all around everywhere. Now, he got beaten to death on the back end last year just because they really had nothing else going on in the secondary other than Eric Stokes. Right? Darian Porter was still growing. They didn't have Teron Johnson. They had Cameron Richardson out there and all that. So it just wasn't the greatest group. So he got beaten to death in pass coverage. They just attacked him and attacked him and attacked him. And it showed. He was 96th in passer rating allowed, 104th in touchdowns allowed with 7. 81st in completion percentage allowed, 69th in forced incompletions. He wasn't doing a whole lot of breaking up those balls. So it'll be interesting to see how he responds, because there's aspects of his game where if he's not, most of that was given up also when he's playing free safety, a traditional free safety role. So when he's playing in the box, when he's that dime linebacker, when he's playing in the slot, he's just a lot better. It's just he doesn't have that top speed. So if he's stuck playing against some of these faster guys, he's going to get beat because he doesn't have the speed to keep up. But if it gets into like this physicality matchup, like if he's against a tight end, for example, I think he can match up a lot better against them. Or if he has to come down and play against a running back, I think he does really well in that scenario as well. So how Rob Leonard puts him in those advantageous situations is going to be something to watch. Now, there's a huge potential that maybe with how all this DB room works out, maybe it opens up Jeremy Chinn to just be a linebacker, be like a smaller linebacker, because you look at him, you look at Quay Walker, I mean, what's the difference? I don't look at them and see like a significant difference in size or athleticism or anything. Like Jeremy Chinn is not like the greatest athlete for a safety, but he's a great athlete for a linebacker. So I wonder if, Traden Stukes and Dalton Johnson and all that, if they work out early on, and Jermod McCoy sort of comes into play here, do they choose to get super young in the secondary with a lot of young starters to upgrade the linebacker room and get Quay Walker out of there and get Jeremy Chinn paired up with Nakobe Dean instead? Because I think it would play a lot more into Jeremy Chinn's skill set, especially at this stage in his career where he's a little longer in the tooth than what he was previously after all those years in Carolina, putting a lot of miles on his body and with all the physicality he was expected to put out there. So overall, this is my 31st ranked defense. They're a bottom tier 5 with their defensive coaching, 28th in pass defense, 31st in run defense. Outside of what they have with Maxx Crosby, there just isn't like that sign of a true star player, of like a top level player. There's not a whole lot going on with the interior defensive line and the linebacker room. So up the middle, they're going to be incredibly vulnerable this year to everything. the intermediate passing game, and the run game. So they're really just kind of in search of who's going to be the breakout star that comes out of nowhere, basically, right now. That's what they're looking for. That's going to try to help this defense out, because right now, their defense is not going to be something that's going to be helpful to this young offense with their young quarterback. With their strength of schedule, they have the 7th hardest schedule. Vegas over-under is 5.5 wins only. I still got them going under. I like the Miami draw at the beginning of the year. They match up really well against the Dolphins. I like that home game against Tennessee late. The yellow ones, man, the pushes, the Saints, the Jets, Cleveland, Arizona. You would have loved to get one of those at home. That would have been another green for me, for sure. I would have loved, instead of getting the Jets and the Cardinals on the road, I don't know, maybe you got Seattle on the road, a game where even having them at home, you're probably going to lose anyway. Or that Buffalo game, it's like, give me Buffalo on the road. You know, we're gonna lose that. Give us the Jets at home. Give us the Jets at home. Don't give them any type of like advantage. If you flip that, I would have maybe been like, they could probably get the over, but just not great scheduling in terms of the home away aspect of things here. It gets tight there. Kansas City, New England, Buffalo, the Rams. You got 49ers, Seattle, Denver. Like, get some tough hauls here. So maybe playing Kirk Cousins until the bye week is a good idea, because then you come out of the bye week, you got Tennessee and you got Arizona. You know, maybe that Kansas City game at the end of the year is meaningless to the Chiefs, so maybe that's a better matchup for him as well. It's just a weird thing of where he would fit in as a great option to be a starter. You know, maybe Cleveland. Maybe Cleveland would be a great start, because then he can play that game, get the bye week to look over how his first professional game went, and then come out of that bye week a little more prepared for game number 2. It'll be interesting to see how that all works out, how that preseason battle works with Mendoza and Cousins, and how quickly Mendoza can get on the field here. So overall, my 28th ranked team, 20th head coach, 23rd offense, and the 31st ranked defense. Individual strengths and strengths from individual players, but there isn't really a group on this team that has a true strength to it, and that's inevitably what drags them down. And there you have it, my number 28 team in my 2026 NFL Deep Dive Series, the Las Vegas Raiders. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments in the comment section below. Thumbs up the video. It helps push it out in the algorithms, all that good YouTube-y stuff. And we're rolling. We are rolling. So if you missed some of the other videos that we've done so far, releasing 32, 31, 30, and 29, then please go check those out if you haven't already. And if you're here a little bit later, then you'll be able to watch my next team, the number 27 team, whoever that may be. Maybe you know already. Maybe you're here after I've already posted it. But I will see you guys with the next video next time.